Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Leveraging Lead Indicators for Data-Driven Health and Safety. We're thrilled to have you all here as we explore how to harness the power of data to transform workplace health and safety. My name is Christina, and on behalf of myosh, I'm so excited to introduce our speaker today, Greg Stark from Wellbeing. Greg will be sharing valuable insights into how lead indicators can guide proactive health measures, reduce costs, and ultimately boost overall workplace performance. So over the next hour, we'll dive deep into data-driven strategies that can help us better understand the financial and organisational impacts of employee wellbeing. You'll learn how identifying key lead indicators can signal potential health and safety issues before they escalate, which empowers you to take preventative action. Now, I know Greg will agree with me, but we encourage you all to engage with us throughout today's session. So please don't hesitate to ask questions via the Q&A box or share your thoughts in the chat. And just collaborate as much as possible. Your input is just going to make this session so much more enriching. So stick around until the end as well, because we'll be hosting a live Q&A where Greg will address all your questions. However, it is also going to be recorded. So if you have to duck out or if you miss a little bit, don't stress, you can rewatch it as well. So with that, let's get started and let's welcome Greg Stark.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome everyone. I am Greg Stark, Director at Wellbeing. We specialise in helping organisations to proactively support employee wellbeing. I started my career working with professional athletes and bring those same principles of how we, mitigate against injury and maximise human performance into the workplace. And one of my favourite things to do and one of my favorite things to look at is data, and I love numbers. And so I thought today we might start with a bit of a magic trick. I'll get you all to think of a number between 1 and 10. Now take that number and add 2, times that number by 2, subtract 2, divide that by 2, and then subtract your original number. Now, I'm guessing everyone's final answer will be 1.
How is that?
If it's not 1, then maybe we need to go through the maths again. But I guess the reason that I like to look at numbers is that numbers should be able to not just be there to look at, but actually to be able to tell a story. And that's what we want from today is to how do we use numbers to tell the story, to get a better picture of what's happening from a health and wellbeing perspective. And I think one of the key ways to look at wellbeing and the data and the numbers, I love this meme. It's one of the most used memes. But if the CFO was to come to you and ask you, what is the wellbeing return on investment? What would your answer be, and how would you back up that ROI with evidence? Because unfortunately, fortunately, we know wellbeing programs are the right thing to do. They help people to feel valued and perform at their best. Work should be contributing to making people's lives better, and wellbeing is a central part to that. However, these things don't drive business decisions. At its core, a wellbeing program needs to reduce business costs, meet legislative requirements, and in an ideal world, even make the business more money. Now, we've worked with businesses where in a 12-week period, we've improved wellbeing by 20%, and we've been able to show that. Coincidentally, the groups that we've worked with have been sales teams, and they've increased by 30%. So as a return on investment, you'd be pretty happy with that. However, we can't always claim all the credit because there's always a lot of moving pieces to those things. But what that client is seeing time and time again is that the team that we've worked with within their business, they've always been the highest performing sales team. Sales is a great example, but you've got many divisions in many different industries in different types of businesses. So how can we create data that can show that return on investment for businesses and looking at the effectiveness of your programs? So I'd love to hear from you, as Christina mentioned at the start. I want to keep today as interactive as possible. So one of the first things I'd like to hear from you is what do you currently measure on a regular basis? And as simply as you can, why do you measure that? If you
So
can,
I've popped that question into the chat box as well, Greg. So if everybody could answer us in there, that would be wonderful.
excellent. While those answers coming through, I'll go ahead a little bit more. Obviously,
Yep.
the reason we want to know this information from you is that we can't manage what we don't measure. And I want you to take some time to really think about what it is that you're measuring and, more importantly, why are you measuring it? Because last year we were getting lots of requests from clients asking how can they get more funding from the CFO? What sort of wellbeing model can we put together to show the impact that the funding into wellbeing programs is creating for the organisation? And so we've used this simple formula here where we can calculate losses through poor wellbeing, looking at commonly used data points, and we're able to estimate what the savings that can be generated from an effective wellbeing program. And eventually we want to be able to use this data to then track our progress in wellbeing as we go. Christina, what have we got coming through in the comments section?
So far we have incidents, retention, and staff satisfaction, workers' comp claims, mechanism of injury, i.e. stress claims, survey results, and Fiona mentions that they use Thrive at work. Sick days was one. Sick days again, productivity, engagement, innovation, and again, sick days, which seems to be quite a common.
Yeah. Innovation. Again, it'd be great to, look at and understand, if possible, is people how, from the audience, how are you measuring innovation? How do you quantify some of these things? Because again, these things are all very important to organizations, but how do we quantify them is often the tricky part. Incidents, sick days are all very common as well. Survey results from an engagement perspective, retention numbers, again, are all very common use measures. Again, if there's any more coming through, and again, getting a bit more of an understanding of why you're measuring those things would be fantastic.
So another one Fiona has just mentioned is how much we spend on wellbeing programs and attendees.
Attendees, yeah.
Oh, and Gail, sorry, I missed Gail's one. Company of choice.
So awards, I imagine that is tied to as companies of choice. Perfect. Well, hopefully today we can put into perspective some of those measures that you have, maybe look at some of the other ones that you can bring in, and then how do we tell the story of what's happening from a wellbeing perspective, so that when we do go to that CFO and they're asking about, the return on the spend that you're currently getting, we can show how that is impacting the organisation. So when we look at our basic formula here, we've got our baseline costs. Now, in the baseline costs, we've chosen to focus on a lot of these areas that you've mentioned around workers' comp, absenteeism, turnover, and presenteeism. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those in a second. But to look at the return on investment, we then looked at what is the cost of that program, not just financially, but also the time that it's taking from people, because that does have an impact and is always one of the questions that we get, that we don't want to take too much time away from people. And then the last part there is the amended baseline costs. So based on your program's effectiveness, what does those costs come down to? So I'm going to explore this formula in a bit more detail and talk through that a little bit further. So when we look at those baseline costs, we can see there absenteeism, comp claims, employee turnover, and presenteeism. So data from Safe Work gives us really great insights around absenteeism and comp claims. The ABS gives us great data around employee turnover rate across all the different industries. What is the median levels of turnover and claims. And then presenteeism was explored in great detail by PwC in the 2014 report, where based on absenteeism levels, we can calculate presenteeism. And presenteeism is obviously where employees are turning up but not performing at their best. They're there, but they're not really there in that productivity measure. as well. And as you can see under each of those silos, that we've been able to calculate by industry, size of company, and average salary, what the severity and prevalence of those different conditions are, how many hours are lost, the number of employees that will impact, and the average salary of those employees. The claims is the frequency of claims, the average cost of claims, and then industry turnover, employee turnover is an interesting one. The research varies quite a lot. It can be anywhere between 33% to 150% of a person's salary. We've gone with the weight of evidence in that 33% on that more conservative end of employee turnover costs is the cost of the organisation.
It would be so interesting to see the numbers pre and post COVID, because I feel like that would have changed a lot.
Yeah, and it is
each one of those pillars.
Yeah, it is interesting, a lot of the trends. And we're going to share some data that's come out in some recent reports as well as we go on. But as we look at here, what does this look like in an organisation right now? Based on the latest data, we can see the variables at the top there. So Acme Co is obviously not a real company, but we're saying they have 5,000 employees with an average salary of 78,000 in the construction industry. The calculator then looks at the prevalence across that industry, and based on those numbers above, can calculate in the first line there the estimated people who are affected by mild, moderate, and severe poor mental health. What is the estimated amount of time lost through absenteeism and presenteeism? It then calculates, based on that time lost, what is the financial implications to the business there. So as you can see, absenteeism is costing around $4 million and presenteeism is costing around $6.5 million. Workers' comp claims, we are finding with clients that we are taking through this calculator that this is a bit more on the conservative end for some organisations. Some organisations, it's pretty reflective of what they see, but the number of claims and what the average cost of that claim is. So for workers' comp claims, it's about $2.2 million there. And then turnover rate. So for the construction industry, it's at 10%, so 475 staff. At a 33% of their salary, you're looking at about $12.5 million a year around poor wellbeing impacts.
If you were a CEO or a leader in a company and you saw these figures and weren't impacted by the insane amount that mental health and wellbeing can cost your company, you shouldn't be in that role. Like, this is just mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, we are getting better visibility on these numbers and the reporting of these numbers, and an understanding of not only what is the cost of these numbers, but if we implement change programs, what can they become?
Yeah.
That's I think the main point that we want to take out of looking at these numbers and putting them in a way that it is meaningful for organisations to calculate the cost of not doing anything, of inaction, but then also if we do put action and funding into wellbeing, what can that look like?
But that's the beauty of this, isn't it? Like, this is figures, this is facts, this is stuff that's going to actually grab the attention of the people that are running the business, that deal with figures and facts, and not just hear a word of wellbeing or hear a word of mental health and think, oh, that doesn't cost anything, I can't think about that right now. It does.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, not viewing it from the lens of, oh, it's just a nice thing to offer people to make them feel good, but actually there is tangible benefits and cost benefits to the organisation if done well.
That's exactly right. Just a quick question on this slide before we go.
Yep.
I know I'm probably going to cause us to go over, but Jen has asked, are these turnover figures excluding natural attrition, retirement, etc.?
They are just based on per industry. What do we know is the attrition rates? Again, it's not directly related to poor wellbeing, that people are leaving due to poor wellbeing. But what we do, and you'll see a bit later, we know that if we improve wellbeing outcomes, what impact does that have on overall turnover rate as well?
Cool,
so again, it's not broken down individually into those different reasons or types, but it's just overall turnover.
Yeah.
And then if we have good wellbeing, how is that reduced?
Love it. Thanks, Jen.
Keep the questions coming. Love it.
Yes.
Thanks, Christina. So then the question then becomes, how do we go about fixing these costs and reducing the overall costs and risks to the business? And so we look at things, what we call our wellbeing model of prevention and performance. Because again, if we look at the behaviors that help prevent against ill health, they're very similar to the behaviors that we need to help promote performance. But again, it comes down to what are we measuring and monitoring in assessing our own effectiveness in this area. So a lot of the common measures that we focus on would deem to be lag indicators. And what we mean by lag indicators is markers post a critical event. So again, if we look at absenteeism, that is once someone is already sick. If we look at workers' comp claims, that's once someone is already injured. Or if we look at retention rates, that's after someone has already choose to leave. So by the time we get this data, it's often too late. Costs are blowing out, and it's very hard to make changes post-event. So we're seeing a trend within the industry to become much more focused on lead indicators. So again, what are the things that are pointing to hazards further down the road? And we're seeing a lot in the preventative space around psychosocial risks and identifying those hazards within organisation, engagement surveys, as well to identify potential retention issues down the line. But where we really would love to see the industry going, and we see the future in the industry, is around real-time proactive measures in understanding more around workload and work design for workplaces, and also individual capacity to deal with that workload. As I mentioned, my background is working with elite athletes. And again, this was a lot of the work that we did with elite athletes, is to look at measures in how effective they were in identifying athletes at risk of injury and athletes that were at risk of performance decline. And we had access to all sorts of data. We could measure what they ate, levels of hydration, how much they slept, what weights they lifted, how far they ran, what their HRV was, like their stress response, heart rate response was. But the most powerful measures that we had was finding two simple questions. Was how ready do you feel for the day's workload? And how hard did you perceive that workload? Because what's really important at an individual level, many individuals can be given the same work, but their capacity and how they perceive that work can be different. Or that same individual can be given the same workload day in, day out, but their capacity can fluctuate as well. So what we're trying to do is identify relative change over time, not necessarily looking for absolute outcome. So if we look at this model, and what does that look like at an individual level? If we just focus on the lag indicators, we would know that burnout is on the rise. We're seeing lots of reporting on people mentioning that burnout is a huge issue. So EAP usage is going up. People are having more days off. We're having higher turnover, more likelihood to leave, and obviously increasing those costs. And again, if we're focusing just on that data, it's almost too little too late by the time we get to that point. But if we can start to focus on those lead indicators, at an individual level, people will start to socially disconnect. They will have a reduced ability to communicate. There will be a reduction in their sleep quality, an increase in their workload or perceived increase in their workload. We'll see disengagement, work performance will drop off, and even, increased incidents of workplace bullying and those sort of things. So if we start to manage those incidents and designs early and have early intervention, we can then reduce the lag indicators further down the line. Early intervention can happen from many different streams. It can be internally. Obviously, managers and leaders, I feel like they get a lot of the responsibility put on them. We also know that they are at the greatest levels of burnout at the moment because of the added responsibility of not only looking after themselves, but their teams, but also peer-to-peer colleagues, that if we can get people more connected, having better quality conversations and creating ways to manage and monitor these early indicators, we can then put into place early interventions. And if we are looking at costs, and we've got those questions coming from the CFO, if we take, again, an early intervention measure such as health coaching for a 6-session, 12-week program, that would be around $300 per person. If someone gets to that point of needing critical care, where they're needing to see a psychologist and a 6-session program with them, you're looking at about $1,500. So again, if we're looking at return on investments, if we're just focusing on those lag indicators, the costs are significantly more by the time the person gets to that critical point. And a lot of the research, or some great research from Monash recently, where it compared the coaching model compared to psychotherapy model to treat participants that were clinically depressed. They were monitored over 12 weeks. Both groups had the same outcome of a 40% reduction in symptoms, but the difference was the cost in the program. So again, if we can front-end wellbeing interventions to be more proactive in those lead indicators, the lag indicators come down, but also the cost of intervention comes down as well. So again, we'd love to hear from you. Would EAP...
sorry, go on. Go on, sorry.
EAP usage be a strong, an indicator of a strong program or a weak program, or an effective program or ineffective program?
So you'll notice, everybody, I have launched a poll for you all to answer. Again, just asking the question, is EAP usage an indicator of a strong program or a weak program? Before the results come in, I'm going to go with a strong program, just from what I'm thinking in my head, but I'm sure you will elaborate.
Yes.
It depends, I guess. If it's the numbers are high, I would say it's a strong program. If it's a weak program, I would say the numbers would be low. But that's what I'm thinking. I'll just wait for a few more people to answer. So far, strong program is winning at 80% roughly, weak program at 20%. What are your thoughts on that?
Perfect. And again, the answer depends, again, on lots of other factors. So again, what we want to be doing is looking at how these different levels of data can interact and what picture do they tell, because we know that typically EAP usage is about 2.5% of an organisation's workforce. Now, that can either be a sign that there's very low incidence and that we're being really good on that proactive care, that there's not many people needing to utilise services like that. Or it could be a sign that people aren't using the services because there's a lack of trust there, or they're unaware that those services are available to them. So that data by itself doesn't tell the full story. We need to look at the data across all means of proactive indicators, or lead indicators that are proactive, lead indicators that are preventative, and also those lag indicators, that if we can start to combine some of that data together, we can then understand the story of what is leading into people utilizing EAP. Is it because everyone's very comfortable and is in a mentally thriving workplace, or is it that people are fearful of using services like that for the impacts that it's going to have on them?
Like Fiona has just said, it depends on the focus of the wellbeing program as well, as to whether it's going to be a strong or a weak result, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's exactly what we want to be looking at now is, again, what does best practice look like from a wellbeing program's perspective, and how does data lead into that? So we can see Safe Work released a report just the other week, a couple of weeks ago now. Some of the key findings from that report, that since 2007, fatalities at work have been steadily decreasing and plateaued. 200 is still too many. Vision Zero, I know for the industry is where we're all aiming and hoping for. And again, there's lots of variables that come into making workplaces safe. But I think the parts that I found most interesting in this report is that if we look at serious claims by nature, that physical injuries account for the greatest volume of workers' comp claims. 35% of those workers of overall claims are from physical injury. And then if we look at the graph on the right there, we can see that mental health conditions account for the most amount of time lost and the most amount of compensation paid at 37 weeks and $65,000 per claim. So again, as an organisation, benchmarking yourself against some of this data is a great place to start to understand what's happening in your workforce and where you might need to direct attention. These are all lag indicators of where things might be going wrong, along with near misses and those sort of things that is specific to your industry. And again, the Safe Work Report, if you haven't already, download that. There's great detail there across the different industries when it comes to the different types of claims and what's leading into those claims. Then if we can combine some of that data that might be leading to the physical and mental injuries, we then start to look at data like this from our great friends at Super Friends, our super friends at Super Friends. They're a great partner of ours. They have a survey called the Thriving Work Index. They've got a couple. Thriving Work Index, I think, is this particular one. But essentially, they survey across many different industries. They look at positive mental health outcomes such as connectedness, safety, leadership, work design, and capability. And their reports show that there is a direct correlation between these domains and workplace outcomes such as psychological distress, burnout. So emphasizing the importance of taking proactive measures to create this mentally healthy workplace. So some of the data that's come out from their reports, that from 2022 to 2023, people are becoming less connected, feeling less safe and less supported. And that this is increasing the retention rates we can see here, where 11% of people overall have decided to leave, basically, and 18% are considering leaving. So how are we supporting those people at that 18% mark to really mitigate against some of those people that leave, knowing that there's huge costs on the other end for organisations? Then if we can take this data, which is showing a lot more around that sort of work design, preventative lead indicators, and combine some of the data that we provide, where it's proactive wellbeing management at an individual level, getting an understanding across employees' mindset, movement, nutrition, recovery. That when we can understand that individual level of capacity, combining it with the work design aspects of how people are finding their workplaces and those environments, that's where we can find best practice. So this is an example of a simplified dashboard that we provide where clients can see their overall wellbeing index score, and the benchmark is based on averages that we see across all industries. As we build out the data, we'll be able to provide more industry-focused reporting there as well. But we can see here on this particular dashboard, they are slightly below the benchmark score, particularly across recovery and movement. And if we look a little further into some of that detail there, when it comes to the recovery piece, not taking breaks throughout the day, having a poor quality sleep, and feeling like they're working out, not being able to disconnect. So if we combine this data with what we're seeing in the Super Friends data, we're able to see that a decrease in sleep can impact the employee's capability, and a decrease in time to socially connect can impact a leader's ability to lead compassionately. And we know that sleep, if we're able to get some measurements and some feedback on how an employee's sleep might be going, because their risk of physical injury is double if they sleep less than 6 hours for 3 consecutive nights, and your mental performs, and again, I feel like my mental performance is suffering from a lack of sleep at the moment, it performs as though your blood alcohol reading of 0.1.
Wow. I was just thinking maybe I can use the this excuse to buy myself a Whoop band and claim it on tax.
Yeah. Well, again, we're getting far greater data points, and technology is evolving in such a way where we can get some more of this objective data around sleep and movement and those sort of things.
That's such a jarring thing you just said, though, that the alcohol level and the sleep level, like it just goes to show how important it is.
Yeah. And again, a lot of people, and again, we've seen it in a lot of our programs, that by making subtle changes to sleep patterns and sleep routines, how it then influences everything else, that
Mhm.
how they're able to deal with stress, how they're able to perform physically and mentally. It can be a real game changer. But again, having conversations and understanding around those things for individuals, but also for organizations, can be really powerful in how we mitigate risk and calculate costs on that lag end.
But even for companies to know that it's not just during work hours that we need to be thinking about our employees. It's their nightly routines. It's going to affect their next day's productivity at work. It's so
Yep.
important.
Yeah, and again, we're seeing a much more holistic perspective taken within the industry. Where, again, I've heard people talk about it. You used to come to work and be expected to leave your emotional baggage at the door and come and just work. Where now businesses are realizing that everything's more integrated. People are working from home. The classic sort of 9 to 5 is different. The responsibility to support people, not just in their time that they're spent at work, but their time outside of work, can influence what happens when they're at work as well. And again,
Exactly.
we often have these conversations around work design and individually focused programs, and we shouldn't be focusing on individual programs. We should be focusing just on work design. Best practice is where both happen simultaneously, because what you're doing at home, again, we might set up the most perfect workplace where there is zero risk of anything happen. But if that same employee is going home and watching episodes of Netflix or TikToks until 4 a.m. and only getting 3 hours sleep and then coming into work, the risk of injury is still double. And that mental performance is performing as though you've got a blood alcohol reading of 0.1. So again, these indicators can be really powerful in not only identifying areas of risk, but also formulating future direction of programming. What supports do different sections within your business need? Is certain sections really good in dealing with stress, and so they don't need more supports in that, compared to other parts where they might be better at getting enough sleep, so they don't need supports there, but actually being really targeted in your interventions as well. I think something else that comes up often in a lot of these surveys, and if we're doing too many surveys, people get survey fatigue. Something that is a more proactive survey such as this, and it enables an individual to self-reflect. And we know that self-reflection is the first part to self-development. So if we want people to adapt more positive wellbeing behaviors, they need to take that time to reflect first. Because survey fatigue is reported when there's little action shown off the back of surveys, and if the survey is just there to fulfill the needs of the organisation. So we're doing surveys because we have to, and we just want to see where things are wrong, but actually don't put in place any interventions. When we look at things like burnout, one of the best things that we can do is empower employees to have control over their own well-being. And by doing a self-reflection task like this, they can help to identify what are some of the things that they might need to get back to or look at implementing. Then the benefit is that we get really great data and feedback about what's affecting employees, and provide that aggregated data to the organisation to direct future programming and also mitigate against risk there.
That's the thing. It's so important that it's all well and good that we can collect all of this information and we can tick a box and say we're compliant and we're doing all the right things. But the right thing is to actually go ahead and make changes based on the data that you've been given.
Exactly. Yep. And again, that's what we want to avoid when we're looking at the data, is not just keep every year looking at, the decline in employees over time and say, oh, we need to do something about that. But actually, what is it that needs to improve, and how are we tracking that proactively, not just at the end of the line? We would love everyone now to take a moment and just reflect on your own well-being and think about some of the behaviors that we know that are essential to optimal human functioning. If you scan the QR code, there'll be a quick survey which you can complete around the well-being.
I've also popped that link to that QR code as well into the chat box. So if you can't scan it on the screen, you can just click that link and that will take you to the same thing.
Perfect. There's 20 questions. It will only take a couple of minutes for you to think and reflect and identify the areas that you might need to be improving on as well. So we'll give you a few minutes to reflect through there. Has there been many more questions or thoughts in the comments section?
Not just yet. No, I think everyone's just listening at the moment. It's crazy to think. I'm just so stuck on the whole the cost and what we can do to minimize it. And I think it's just so important to remember to try and get ahead of the problems before it's too late. And it's the same as when you get sick, or like you break an arm or something like that, or you have something pop up because you've injured yourself and you're not prepared for it. And it's like, okay, so now I'm all of a sudden out of work. I've got to take time off. I've got to pay for medical bills. I've got to do all of this sort of stuff. Whereas if you were prepared, obviously no one's prepared to break a limb, but what I'm saying is if you were prepared and like proactively checked in regularly, it's going to eliminate the cost, like you were saying. Yeah. At the end. And it's just it's crucial. I'm hoping that sessions like today are going to become a more prominent and more safe topic to talk about with your leaders as well, and make them realize that it's not saying that all leaders don't realize, but they're the ones at the end of the day that we need to tell and need to explain that we're feeling this way and that these sorts of things can help not only the bottom line, but retaining employees and keeping everyone safe and keeping everyone positive in the workplace.
Yeah, perfect. And I love that. And, as you've touched on there, the cost when things go wrong, it's a lot more expensive to try and fix things at that end of the spectrum. Whereas if we can get measures of those early indicators where things aren't quite right and put interventions in place there, that's where it can become a really powerful machine. And again, hopefully
it's literally like servicing your car. If you go for your regular checkups, you go for your regular services, you do all the things as per when you should, when like your car's not going to break down all of a sudden with these crazy major problems that are going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars, are they? Because you've maintained it, you're not just hoping for the best, keeping that fuel light on.
Exactly. And it's a great analogy because you can probably get away without servicing it for a while. You might skip a service here and there and it might be all right, but eventually it will catch up. And when it goes wrong, it goes drastically wrong as well. So again, taking a much more proactive mindset to how we're managing well-being to lower the cost of the organization and give people some really great data.
Love it.
On that note, what makes an effective wellbeing program and what do those costs then become as an organization? So you can see on this dashboard here, this is using the example of the organization we had at Acnico at the start, where they were losing 25 million a year due to poor wellbeing. We can see there that a majority of that is in turnover, close to 50%, workers' comp, presenteeism and absenteeism through the other sort of 50% there. But most importantly is the diagram there and the cost savings. That again, if we can see the pre-measures there is at about 25 million. If we have a low engaging wellbeing program, that comes down to by about 5 million. So reduce cost by 5 million. If we have a moderate engaging program, it comes down by about 6 million. If we have a high engagement program, it comes down by about 7 million. So again, it's a significant return on investment for organizations if they are taking a proactive approach to engaging employees. And we can see engagement. And again, it was interesting at the start there, attendees to different events is one way to measure engagement, but engagement is key there in terms of how do we calculate the cost of a high-performing wellbeing program. And again, those numbers of 20, 40, and 59 is a very specific number. Again, that is based on some research and evidence that I'll take you through in just a second as to why the percentages are at those thresholds. But again, an important thing to think about when we're looking at wellbeing is that a lot of the funding is often directed at that yellow section of that critical care where people need, medical, safety, psychological help. But if we're going to look at what makes an effective wellbeing program, if we're going to get anywhere near a 59% engagement rate within your workforce, we've got to also build in mind that there's going to be a percentage of people that are just at a management level when it comes to their physical and mental well-being, but there's a 73% of people who will make up the bulk of your wellbeing program to get to that level of engagement. And I guess my question is, what value are you providing to those people to engage those people, and not just waiting to a point of where it gets to a critical point where things can go wrong? So again, if we look at that example of EAP usage, engaging just 2.5% isn't going to be significant enough as a wellbeing program, but how do we actually engage the broader workforce, and what are we doing to support them? Because if we're engaging 59% of the workforce and 2.5% are using EAP, that to me is a strong program. So how are we measuring the overall engagement in wellbeing? And again, we're going to move into that section in just a second. How do we measure engagement, and different ways to measure engagement? Because that's what's going to determine the impact of the cost. So again, research shows that if we have a high engaging program, so we get 59% of your workforce engaging in a wellbeing program, absenteeism comes down by 35%, workers' comp claims come down by 50%, retention rates improved by 22.5%, and productivity is improved by 9%. And so that's how we calculate that return on investment. But it's also asking that question, because when we look at effectiveness of programs, it's about engagement. And so my question to you that I would love to hear from you in the comments section right now, that if that same CFO was to approach you and ask, what is a proactive wellbeing measure that we can put into place that can give us good feedback on how our business is performing?
So I've added that, everybody, into the chat box. If you were asked by the CFO to provide a proactive wellbeing measure for the business to secure a loan, what would it be? While we're waiting for people to answer, Greg, I've had Sen and Therese mention that once they've submitted their answers to the QR code and the link that we shared, they just simply got a thank you message. Is that correct, or where does the information go?
They should get the information to their inbox. They should.
Oh, perfect. There you go, guys. So it should be sent to your inbox. Lovely.
Perfect. And the reason that we add that extra little bit on into that question of securing a loan is because we're seeing an emerging trend of financial institutions in their sustainable finance. And what we mean by sustainable finance is a criteria that in order to secure the loan, they need to meet certain ESG, environmental, social, and government factors in order to get that loan in the first place. But also the interest paid on that loan and financial penalties will be based on businesses hitting certain targets when it comes to employee sustainability. And this is all tied in around the UN sustainability goals that were published a few years ago. We can see there that one of the goals, number 3, is around creating good health and well-being, and number 8, to create decent work and economic growth as well. And how do these factors come together from a proactive perspective to show that organizations are doing the right thing? So a lot of the sustainability finance has previously focused on environmental responsibility. We are now seeing a trend of organizations being held accountable to proactive well-being sustainability. How are we proactively taking responsibility of our employees? Love to hear some examples that people have come up with in terms of a proactive engagement measure, and I'll share some that we've had with clients as well that we've seen coming through.
You might have to go ahead and share some yourself, because nobody has answered as yet to that question.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
how about you share some insights?
yeah, some of the other ones, I mean, easy one that people have already identified is attendees to different health events is one way to measure, but we're finding even greater levels of detail where one client has to have 95% of their employees to have a health consultation by 2026.
Wow.
So basically, every employee in that organization needs to have spoken to someone around their health and well-being. Otherwise, there will be financial penalties for that organisation. Another organisation need to have 300 mental health first aid practitioners qualified. Again, there's challenges with that, but again, it's a way to quantify ways of getting people more proactive in having these conversations around looking after well-being.
That's unreal.
60% of downloads of wellbeing apps. So again, whether that's an EAP app that has to be downloaded, 60% of all employee workforce, that is a key measure of how engaged they might be proactively. Even using our wellbeing index submissions, so total submissions, by people taking that time to self-assess, becomes a really easy way to quantify what is the volume of the workforce that are hearing and engaging and thinking about health and well-being that we can then support.
I think it's important to note too that it's not necessarily just all on the leaders, and it's not necessarily all on the CEO or your managers. Like what you just said then, the self-assessment made me think of it. We need to take some ownership on this as employees ourselves, and realize that in order for things to change, we need to initiate change sometimes. Our leaders are so busy doing everything and everything to keep the business afloat and keep everything going and to provide employment for all of us. And it's important for us to then give them feedback on different things that they might not have the time or the capacity to generally think about often. Whereas it's your stuff that you're dealing with on a daily basis. It's not their stuff that they're dealing with on a daily basis. So it's important to remember that we're not all mind readers, and we're not all going to be able to have the capacity to think about these things at all times. So it's important to self-assess, like you said, Greg, and once you've done that self-assessment, what do you want to see happen? What changes do you want to make? Where do you want to go from here? And take that to someone that you trust or a mentor within your company and go from there.
Yeah, perfect. Again, really well said there, Christina. And again, if we go back to some of the earlier slides where we talk about, interventions before getting to that critical point, that there's three different layers. There's internal, which again, typically everyone just points at the manager and leader, and we know that rightfully so, they do have a huge impact on your overall well-being, and they do play a really important role there. But internal can also be peer-to-peer as well. And everyone supporting everyone. We talk about the compassionate colleague and how do we support each other and look after each other. The next level is external. So again, having an external provider such as ourselves or an EAP or someone to come in and provide that support on the front end of getting to that critical point, but also internal, autonomously. How can you take more responsibility for your health to help you, deal and perform at your best? Again, that ability to have choice and feeling in control and focusing on what are those levers that you can control and not letting those things you can't control get in the way. Was there a few comments around other ideas on proactive measures that people could put in place if the CFO was to ask them how would they measure their well-being proactively, not rely on absenteeism, presenteeism?
None just yet. No.
Yeah, and
So
again,
we might just carry on.
tough questions. They are very tough questions to think about on the spot. And again, I guess my intention today is not to have all the answers for you, but actually get you to think about actually how are we measuring things, and going forward, can we be more proactive in that measure? And
that's what I was going to say. I read that question and I thought to myself, gosh, I don't know where to start. But I think what you've just said then is the session is creating an awareness to start thinking about this stuff and to realize that there is this whole ecosystem that we need to think about when it comes to finance and lead and lag indicators and what we can do to help us help the company and the company help us in return. So I think even if you don't have an answer right now, the fact that we've now all got awareness to start thinking about, it's so good.
Yeah, and perfect. And hopefully we've given you a few topics of conversation that you can open up with the CFO and again provide reporting and data as to, if we put X amount of funds into program and we engage Y amount of employees and we can improve their well-being by X amount, this is the cost that it will save the organization, and we will be making money. And again, we want to help facilitate those conversations as much as possible. So I guess to wrap up, and then again, any questions after that would be great if you want to start putting them in the comments section. As I said, we've created a white paper which goes into the research and the formulation of the calculator. If you want to download that white paper, scan the QR code. There's also going to be a URL, I think, in the follow-up email to this to download that report. And again, taking that to the CFO can really be powerful in showing how that conversation can work when we take a proactive lens looking after wellbeing. If you would like to chat more and get more detailed numbers for your organisation, feel free to email or call me and we can set up a time to go through that and we can provide those hard numbers for you. But I guess, some of the key outcomes that we wanted off the back of today, obviously, is to get you thinking about it. But proactivity is key, trying to get to the front end of those lead indicators before things become a problem and become a more expensive problem at the end after that critical event. Looking at what are the proactive measures that you can take to reduce the likelihood of injuries, compensation claims, and employee turnover. Using that data to also put into place the right interventions. So the data from the lead indicators influencing the information and the supports that you put in place for different areas of your business. And then also that ROI investment. By investing in it proactively and measuring it proactively, we can provide quantifiable ROI, which will demonstrate the value of the wellbeing initiatives that you provide.
I think in case anybody was unaware, an EAP, correct me if I'm wrong, Employee Assistance Program, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, that's not mandatory to have as a company, is it?
No. Again, companies do have it from a risk perspective.
That's what I was going to say. I'm thinking, I've worked in a few different companies before, and I've never known whether the company has an EAP or not. So if you can take anything from today, on top of what Greg's already just discussed, I think it's important to actually check in with your HR representative or someone in your company that you're comfortable with chatting to and ask if they've got one in place, because I know a lot of people wouldn't know whether their company actually has one. And if they do, how do they go about utilizing it? And what can they do to kickstart one? Or let's look into getting one. And what are the reasons behind getting one? I know I didn't know about them until I started working here at myosh. And we've all been encouraged to access them and chat with professionals and whatever. And it's so important. Again, drawing back to the whole awareness, like if you don't know, you don't know. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. So it's so important to be aware whether you actually have one in the first instance, I think.
Yeah. And again, that's a lot of the data is the thing that stops a lot of people from using it and why utilization can often be very low is that people aren't aware of them, that they're available or how to access them. But then, also overcoming some of the stigma around them that
I was just about to say the stigma around them.
Yeah. But again, that's why it's really important that if you can have a proactive program, and again, your EAP support provider should be doing more than just providing the EAP service. They should be actively facilitating people into their programs and providing a lot of the support there. But actually, yeah, by talking about health and well-being, it helps to destigmatize it and hopefully helps with that uptake. So again, EAP usage can be a sign up of a strong program and a weak program. It depends on those factors, whether people are aware of it, whether there's a level of trust and engagement with it.
That's exactly right. And that's what there's literally two conflicting things that preface with exactly what you've just said. And Wayne has mentioned that they have regular toolbox meetings on the value of their EAP program, which I think is amazing. And then Lillian on the other side has said, we've had lots of complaints from our employees who reached out to their company's EAP. Are there any other programs available? Lillian, I'm sure if you get in contact with Greg and the team at Better Being, they'll be able to help you out or point you in the right direction with that. But again, it just goes to show if you don't know or you're unaware or if you're having issues, you need to chat about it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we work with some great EAPs and happy to pass on recommendations there. But what I will say as well is that going back to that other diagram I showed where we want to engage as many people as possible, we don't want our wellbeing program to just focus on speaking to people about the importance of getting critical care when you need it, but we want to focus on the full spectrum of health. And I think, I guess as a closing thought, one of my favorite quotes from the World Health Organization in how they define health, and they say health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So
That's
again,
true.
to be proactive and measure what matters and think about how we are appealing to the whole workforce, not just those people that need the support at the critical end, but does our wellbeing program provide support and engagement? Because that's what's going to influence that return on investment at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So I think if anything, knowledge, awareness, self-assessment, and just feeling safe enough to chat about this within your team at the end of the day is going to save your CFO, your CEO, your manager's money. And if you feel like that's all they're interested in, this is going to enlighten them to realize that this is part of that. Like this is going to affect their bottom line, and whatever we can do to help you guys reach out to them or anything like that, please get in contact with either Greg or myself and we can go from there. But Greg, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved today's session and I'm sure everybody else has as well. Like I mentioned earlier, we have recorded this, so I will email it out to everybody who has registered to attend. I'll also include a link to the white paper, a link to that survey that we sent out earlier, and details on how to contact Greg and the team at Better Being. But Greg, thank you so much. I can't wait for our next session, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and week ahead.
Thank you, Christina. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for everyone for your comments and feedback. Again, really love for you to reach out and let me know your thoughts directly off the back of today as well.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you later.